Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf chaf. What we saw in yesterday's daf was this machloket between Rebbi and Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, about whether lina is poselet moelet b'kiddush hayom. Meaning, if you wash your hands, you do the washing of your hands and your feet, you're a kohen, and then nighttime hits, when the morning comes, do you have to do it again? So Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon said no, you could even do it up to 10 days. And Rebbi said you have to do it again as soon as the morning hits. So today we're going to delve further into this. Ki'ata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came, we're starting from the second line of our daf, end of the second line. Ki'ata Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, by Ilfa. Ilfa asked the following question. L'divrei ha'omer ein lina mo'elet b'kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So the one who says that lina doesn't disqualify b'kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, right? So you wash your hands during the day and your feet, you don't have to do it again the next morning, assuming you're still in the temple. May kiur ma'ushi yifsilu. What if you have water from the kiur, which was sanctified water, the kiur was a klei sharet, is it disqualified? Because remember, things get disqualified. Anything in a sanctified vessel gets disqualified overnight. But the issue is here that mi'amrinan hane lemai kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and kiddush yadayim v'raglayim gufayin lo pasul b'hulina. And since the whole purpose of the water is for kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and if kiddush yadayim v'raglayim itself isn't disqualified by the night, then maybe the water in the kior is not disqualified overnight. Oh, dilma kevan dekadosh bu b'klei sharet mipasle. Or alternatively, you say, listen, anything that's in a klei sharet is disqualified overnight, including the water. Ki'ata Ravin Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar Rabbi Ami Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Pay attention. Ravin said the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, who said the name of Rabbi Ami. We're going to come back to Rabbi Ami, who said the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Hadar Pashit Ilfa. After Ilfa asked this question, Rabbi Yochanan claims Ilfa answered the question later and said, Ke machloket bezo, kach machloket bezo. The same machloket Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon have about kiddush yadayim v'raglayim is the nighttime does it disqualify it? Is the same exact machloket they have by the water in the kior. So Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, who says it's not disqualified, will say the water is not disqualified either. And Rebbi, who requires washing your hands again and your feet, will say that the water is disqualified. Amar l'fanav Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna, but Rabbi Yitzchak bar Bisna comes up for Rabbi Ami and says to him, Rebbe, ata omer, can't you really say that? Ella, hachi am Rabbi Asi, amar Rabbi Yochanan, mishmei de Ilfa, but wait. Rabbi Asi said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan and in the name of Ilfa the following thing. Kiyul shalosh shak'umi ba'erev. We're going to learn soon there was something called a muchni. And the muchni was this contraption that they made in order to lower the water from the sink, the kiyur, into the bottom of into under the ground. They created there was a well there, and they would put the water back in the well, and then it would be connected with fresh water, and then it wouldn't be disqualified at night. So if you didn't do this at night, now obviously it seems like this is saying the water is disqualified at night, okay? But perhaps, we'll see, maybe Rabbi Elazar Bar Shimon didn't think so, okay? Maybe he didn't think you needed it. So anyway, we're going to talk about this. So right now they say, if you didn't put that kior, the water, down under the ground into the well, miba erev, in the evening, mikadesh mimenu lavodat laila, you could use the water that night, or it sounds like that night, ulamachal eno makadesh. So the kohanim who were in the temple that night, working overnight, they could use that water still, and the next day they wouldn't need to wash their hands again. Now, hevinamba. Now they asked the question. Obviously, this goes according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, because Rebbi for sure would require them to do that. And what we're going to try to say here is, you'll see, hevinamba. Now they asked, lemachal eno makadesh. Now, what does it mean lemachar eno makadesh? Delot sarich lekiddush. Okay, it doesn't mean it doesn't need their hands don't need to be sanctified. Odilma ipaslu belina. Lemachar eno makadesh could also mean maybe you can't use that water anymore because it's disqualified. There's two ways to read this. So if you didn't not bury, but lower down the water at nighttime, I'm going to read this in two ways. And then you're allowed to use that water to sanctify people's hands and feet that evening, and you don't need to redo it in the morning. Okay, because ein tzarich lekadesh. That's the first option, and that's because, right, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. Or do we say maybe it means you can't, you don't need, You can't use that water. You could still use that water at night, but you can't use it the next day because it's disqualified. Okay, now, so that's the question. Which one does it mean? Velo pashitlan. Now, the assumption here is that we're talking about that this goes according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, because it's talking about using the right. According to Rebbe, you wouldn't need this. Obviously, you can't. If you sanctified your first of all, it would definitely be disqualified overnight, according to Rebbe. And if you did the kiddush adayim v'raglayim in the evening, you would definitely have to do it in the morning. So there would be no point to bring this bright according to Rebbe. So it must be according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. Now, if we say that it's ifsulu b'lina, then we have an answer, and we say Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon actually does disqualify it overnight. And if we say the first reading, right, then it means it's not disqualified at night. And remember, what did Rabbi Ami say? Rabbi Ami said, he says it's not disqualified, just like you can use the kiddush for the next day. Also, the water's not disqualified. Now, the issue here is that they asked this question. Rabbi Asi said to Rabbi Yochanan that in the name of Ilfa this, then asked the question, what did he mean? Velo pashit lamau, and he didn't ask. He didn't answer. He didn't know how to answer the question. Umar kapashat lemishad, and you have a very simple answer to this question. Okay, and he's saying, if your answer was so clear that that's what Rabbi Yochanan said, then, and that's what Ilfa said, that Rabbi Yochanan said that Ilfa said, then why would Rabbi Asi not know the answer? So now we're going to see if we could try to get to an answer to our question. Does he really say there's a machloket or not? Tashma, let's learn from here. Ben katina sashne masal dad the He made 12 faucets in the sink. Afu asa, there's a Mishna in Yoma. Okay, we're just coming off of Yom Kippur, perfect Mishna to have. Okay, we'll see, we're going to get a little more to Yom Kippur stuff. Afu asa muchni lakior. He also made this muchni, this contraption that we talked about. Shelo yuhume mavnis salim belina. Now, in order not to have the water disqualified at night, they created this muchni. That's what I told you. My lab, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon here. So they assume this must be Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. What they really mean is, doesn't everyone think that they needed the muchni? In other words, it seems clear there was this muchni. Must also follow Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's opinion. And then what do you see? It is nifsal belina. That's why they made the muchni. To which they say, "Lo, Rebbe, you could claim that this is Rebbe's opinion and not Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's, and therefore it doesn't teach you anything about Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon would say. Maybe he didn't think you needed a muchni at all." But the problem is, if you look at the Mishnayot and Yoma there, we're in the 3rd chapter of Yoma. V'hami de Reisha Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, Sefer Nami Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. But we're going to say, if you look in those Mishnayot there in the chapter, you're going to see that just before this, there's a slew of Mishnayot that talk about where the par of the Kohen Gadol stands. Okay, from there they get into someone made the gold for something, and then from there they got into that Ben Katin made the 12 faucets on the Shiur. It's like a Mishnah about kind of like in a shul when they have, this one donated that, this one donated that. That's kind of what the Mishnah go. It's off on a tangent. But the real topic was all within the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and we're going to see. Now, what they're going to try to show is that the Mishnah before Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, in which case this must also be Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, in which case it basically says he thinks it's disqualified, right, overnight. Otherwise, you wouldn't need the muchni. So now we have to understand what's going on. The Katane Resha, it says in the beginning, earlier on in the chapter, Balo Etzel Paro, the Kohen Gadol goes to his par, his bull that he's going to offer on Yom Kippur. Upar Yaomeh ben ha'ulam lamizbech. Now the par was standing, okay? So I don't have the map with me right now to show you, but there's maps of the Beit HaMikdash, which I highly recommend using. From, I think, the Machon Mikdash is the one who sells them. I should have really checked before class. But anyway, there's the maps are very useful. We're going to actually need them later when we get to Midot and some of the later Masechtot that really deal with the temple. And we dealt with them a lot in Yoma, if you remember. So there's different areas in the temple. I'll give you a description. Okay, so you have it in your head. What happens in the temple when you walk in? You walk in to the Azara, trying that the space of the Azara. You walk in through the east and you're facing west. Okay, and then there's north and south. Okay, so you're walking in from the east, facing west. Okay, there's the north side, which will be on your right, and the south side, which will be on your left. Now, slaughtering happened on the north side. So today we're going to talk about that. Where on the north did slaughtering happen? Okay, slaughtering of kodashei, okay, of the higher level sacrifices. But before we get there, let's just talk about the spaces. So first, there's an area you walk in. Okay, we're going to do like strips from when you walk in, from east to west. So you walk in, there's a strip called the Ezrat Yisrael. That's a place where everyone is allowed to be. And that's where before where the Kohanim started kind of in their area. small strip of Ezra Yisrael. Then you have Ezra Kohanim. That's where only Kohanim really went. Okay, that's the Ezra Kohanim. From there, you get to the altar. Now, the altar is situated, there's a bit of a machloket about it, but mainly the ramp is on the south side, and then therefore the edge of the altar on the other side, the wall of the altar is on the north side, okay? Whether it's either centered in the room, a little over to the north side. I'm not going to get into all that today. Past the altar is this area called Bein Ulam LaMizbech. It's between the ulam, which is this hallway we're going to get to, and the altar. So there's this kind of dead space there. Then you go to these steps that lead you up to the ulam. The ulam is like the antechamber before you get into the heichal. And that's where you have the inner altar and the big altar that was in the entrance where we talked about before between ulam and mizbech, right on the first part. That was the big altar where most of the sacrifices happen. The chata'ot pnimiyot that we learned about, the inners, chatat offerings happen on the inside. So now we're going to talk about this, the area and where exactly did they do the slaughtering. So there's a three-way machloket. So balo etza paro. So the kohen goes to his par. Upar yalmei ben ulam lemizbech. The par was situated, would stand. Okay, when the kohen was ready to do the smicha and then the slaughtering, he would stand up the animal, the bull, right in between the ulam and the mizbech. So right in front of the ulam. Rosho ledarom upanav lemaharav. So his head was to the south. His face, right, Rosho ledarom panav lemaharav. He would face, though, they would turn the head of the animal to face the west, which is where the kodashim was. V'hakohen omei b'mizrach, the kohen standing on the eastern side, meaning closer to the altar. Right. Remember, west is always inside. The kodashim is the more west, so east is more facing out. No, he wasn't facing out, but he was standing more to the west. Standing more to the east. Upanav lemarav, but he was facing the west. Everybody always faces the kodashim, right? The same way you always face the kotel when you're there, things like that. Now, man shamatle. The Amar ben ulam lemizbech tzafon. Now, the assumption is he slaughtered the animal there, which means that you can slaughter the animal ben ulam lemizbech. Now, whose opinion is that? We're going to see. That's Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, which is going to prove that this Mishna is Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, how do we know? Tanya, because here comes our three-way machloket about where you could do the shechita on the north side. Which part of the northern side? Which space? Again, there's obviously the north side. That's when you walk in, it's to your right. But the question is, how far into the room? Which area in the north? So, right on the east-west line. So now we're going to see Tanya. Ezewut Safon. What's considered Safon to be able to slaughter the high sanctified offerings? Mikir Mizbech Tzfoni, from the wall of the altar on the north side, which I told you the altar basically ends on the north side. Ad Kotel Azarat Tzfoni, from there all the way to the wall. So basically, okay, it talks about the Korban Olah in the beginning of Vayikra, and it says Al Yerech HaMizbech Safona. That's where you have to do the slaughtering of it, which means Al Yerech Mizbech, opposite the altar. So that means basically the space where the altar takes up, right? If you're walking from east to west, right, into the room, that width all the way across, right? You take that and you go north from the wall of the altar, all the way north, you draw a line. So the line basically lines up with the altar walls, okay? The altar length. Okay, neged kol hamizbeach kulo, right? And then opposite from the altar, that whole space on the north. Okay, that's one opinion. That's divrei Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Mosif af ben ulam lemizbech. He says you can even go farther until, right, another, I think it was 11 cubits, another 11 cubits into the room until you get, so basically from the wall from the, basically the northern, the border from the middle of the room on the north side, from, right, the mizbech, go farther to the ulam, until you get to the entrance to the ulam, that whole space also. So now you see, he held that you could slaughter. Now, the first opinion didn't think you could slaughter a bein ulam lemizbech. So it's definitely not him. So it's likely Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. Rebbe adds, af makom drisat raglei hakohanim u'makom drisat raglei Israel. He says, forget that, the whole north side from the entrance. Now, he added even the entrance to the room. The entrance to the room on the north, right, when you enter the room, go to the right-hand side, right, the north side, and there you can, right, the Israel, the Ezra Kohanim, then the Mizbech, and it sounds like even Bein Ulam Lemizbech. We're going to get back to that because maybe the opinion's Rebbi. Okay, but we'll get back there. Okay, once you get to the chalifot, what are the chalifot? Well, the ulam was 100 cubits long, okay, from north to south. The heichal was only 70 cubits. I get right. I would say the ulam, I call it long. The heichal is the width. Okay, both of these are kind of taking up the space from north south. So the heichal. So again, you have this chamber where you walked in before you got into the heichal. The heichal was much narrower. What was in those spaces, 15 cubits on each side that went out, jutted out? It was called the Beit HaChalifot, which is where they would put knives. Okay, it was this chamber where they stored knives for the slaughtering and other things. Anyway, that area, once you get basically past the Bein Ulam Lemizbech, and you're already at the Ulam where the Chalifot are, nobody thinks you could do the slaughtering there. Okay, there's no opinion like that. Okay, that's already not really important. Point being, right, it's Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, because he's the one who says Bein Ulam Lemizbech. V'tiz Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. Okay, and that was the whole point. Then you can't say that this doesn't match Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. He must have needed the muchni, which means if he needed the muchni, it means that Lina was poselet. Right? Lina destroys, right? The nighttime ruins the water unless it was in the well. So now they say, wait a minute. Tis Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon lo Rebbi, hashta Rebbi, ad Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda mosif, ad Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon lo mosif. Remember he said he added even the entrance area, but he added to everybody, not just he didn't only add to the first opinion, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, he added also onto Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, which means according to him, also the park could have been Bein Ulam Lemizbech because that was a place to slaughter. So they say no. Anan hachi kamrian. This is why we think it's clearly Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, because Isa kedatach Rebbe. Look, when bim countryside reglay kohanim, countryside reglay Israel. In other words, why put the power all the way in when you could put it in the entrance area? So even though it's true, Rebbe thought you could put it there too, but it doesn't seem likely he would have put it there. He would have just left it in the entrance area. So now they're going to say, wait, Elamai, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, look when mikir mizbeach tzfonim, kotel lazarat tzfonim. He says, well, according to that logic, just because it's Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, why did the power specifically have to be Bein Ulam Lemizbech? He could have put it in the area where he agrees with Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, opposite the altar. In other words, it doesn't make any sense either which way, according to any opinion, why specifically it would stand Bein Ulam Lemizbech, to which now the Gemara is going to give a reason. They're going to say, no, there must be a particular reason why they put it Bein Ulam Lemizbech, which actually could match Rebbe as well. And then you don't have to say that the Mishna is Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and then you can go back and reestablish what they claimed Ilfa said, which was that really you don't need the muchni according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. How are we going to do that? Well, why do you think they put it Bein Ulam Lemizbech? Well, think about what's going on here. The Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur, he has to do all the avodot of that day. It's very exhausting. He's fasting. He has a very busy day. They want to make his life easier and not challenge him too much. So what do they say? Mishum chulsha de Kohen Gadol, right? How can you explain why they did it Bein Ulam Lemizbech? It must be, sorry, I think I might have skipped this story. How can you explain why Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, according to him, they didn't do it opposite the altar? Mishum chulsha de Kohen Gadol. They wanted to not weaken him and tire him out. So they put the animal ready for him, basically in the space as close as possible to get into the heichal where he's going to have to sprinkle the blood. So slaughter it as close as possible to where you need to be. Hachanami, mishum chushet de Kohen Gadol. So in that same note, you could explain according to Rebbe. That's the first and say, according to Rebbe, yeah, it's true. You could have done it in the Israel. You could have done it in Israel Kohanim, but you did it Bein Ulam Lemizbech because to make the Kohen's life easier. In which case, the Mishna can match Rebbe. In which case, the muchni has nothing to do with Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's position. And we could go back to saying Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon perhaps really does say that the water's not disqualified overnight if you didn't put it down into the well. Now we're going to have a halacha of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, kidesh yadav v'raglav l'trumat hadashim, lemachar eno tzarich lekadesh, shekvar kidesh b'tchilat avodah. The Trumat Hadashim was the first avoda of the day. It was done very early. It was done even before Alot HaShachar. Alot HaShachar is like the earliest time where we say it's already like it's like Ben Hashmashot of the nighttime. Safek Yom, Safek Laila, right? If you have to daven early, you can daven from Alot HaShachar, even though you shouldn't really. You should wait till sunrise. But this is before Alot HaShachar. It's called from the time of Krot HaGever, either when they would the person would wake everybody up, or maybe when the rooster crows, the Gever is the rooster. Okay, so we have this in Asher Natan L'Sachvi V'Na Lavchim In Yom V'Pin Laila. That's the rooster who knows to distinguish. Anyway, and calls right, wakes up very early in the morning. Point being that if you're the kohen, you're supposed to do the Trumat Hadashim, and you wash your hands, you and your feet. You don't need to do it later on, even though it's still nighttime. Okay, technically it's still night. It's before Alot HaShachar. Shekvar Kidesh Mitchilat Avodah, because you already started that day, even though it's not really that day, but it was for the work of that day. Liman, who does this go according to? Either Rebbe, Hamar, Pasalina. If it's Rebbe, he said the nighttime disqualifies the water. So disqualifies the kiddush, right? Whatever you did, you didn't win in the morning. So what if it was still, for you, it's kind of that day, but it doesn't matter. It would disqualify it. Either Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Hamar, in Sarich Lekadesh, we come out of Sarayamim. You don't even need to tell us this, Rabbi Yochanan, because he doesn't even think you need it every 10 days. It's not like, oh, because you did it now, right? It's good for the rest of the day. It's good for 10 days. You don't even need to. So we're going to try to explain it. Rabbi and Rabbi each have their own explanations. Am Rabbi, lo ulam leRabbi, v'lina de Rabbanan he. We're going to understand all of a sudden, lina, according to Rebbe, is only de Rabbanan. It's only rabbinic. The fact that the water will get disqualified overnight is actually rabbinic prohibition. And therefore, mode de mikrot hagever v'ad lo pasalina. So because it's only rabbinic, he'll do a little kvetch here and say, well, since it's close to the morning, we'll say it doesn't just get disqualified overnight. That's one possibility. Rava Amar lo ulam Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. He says, no, I'll explain according to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. V'ra'a Rabbi Yochanan dvarav b'tchilat avodah v'lo b'sof avodah. Well, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon really does hold this would be totally fine. You wouldn't even need this. But what is Rabbi Yochanan doing? He's holding like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, but only in a case like this, where you're starting your work for the day, even though it's still nighttime, we won't say the night disqualified it. But if it was from the night before, we wouldn't allow it. So he paskins like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, but narrows the psak and says, I'm not going to hold like him across the board. Just going to hold like him in this case. So either we modify Rebbe and say Rebbe really is a little more lenient than we think just because it's Rabbanan, and then we have room to maneuver a little bit. Or Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon stays the way Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon is, but Rabbi Yochanan paskins like him partially. Okay? Because you have to come up with some sort of in between somehow. Mating. And now we're going to have difficulty on Rava, who just said that it's Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, right? But Rabbi Yochanan holds like him only partially. Ra'u achav achiv hakohanim she'yachad v'hen ratzu. What happens after they do the Truman Adeshin? The kohanim who are there, these young kohanim, they see that his brothers, the kohanim, see that he came down the ramp of the altar. V'hen ratzu, they run ubau and they come. Miharu, so they hurry because they have lots of work to do now. B'kidushay dehem v'ragleihem min hakiyur, and then they go to the kiyur and they do the kiddush adayim v'raglayim. Now again, it's still too early. Okay, turning out I'm a bit. So bishlama da'ala baye demokele kerebi umode Rebbe demikrota gever ad safra lo pasalina. According to Abaye, it's very simple. He says this is Rebbe, and he would read this source as saying this source goes like Rebbe, and because they do the kiddush adayim v'raglayim, even though it's still nighttime, but it will cover them for the day because it's only Rabbanan anyway. And then you would say, Hamane Rebbe. This source would be Rebbe. Ela Rava to Mokim like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. But according to Rava, who would say, how would you do this? You'd say this is Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, right? Because according to Rava, Rebbe has no leniency at all. He definitely wouldn't go for this. You'd have to do it again in the morning. But if you'd have to say like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Aval Rebbe mikrot gever ad safra pasalina. So now, right, in other words, Rava, who originally said, Rabbi Yochanan, I didn't read this exactly correctly. Let me just go back and clarify. Rava, who said that Rabbi Yochanan was like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, and that's how he understood it. And he said, I'm just going to paskin like him in this case. But really, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon permits completely and says you don't even need to wash your hands for 10 days. But according to Rebbe, for sure, Lina disqualifies. Hamani. Who does this source go by? Now, the Mishna is not going to really follow anybody because Rebbe pasalina. If it's Rebbe, Lina disqualified. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon ha'amal afilu mikam ba'ad sarayamim eno tzarich lekadesh. If you say it's Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon said you don't even need it once every 10 days. So what do these kohanim need to come in the morning and do this if they did it yesterday and they were still in the temple, right? Like, what do they need it for? So, and you can't come up with this partial thing that we hold like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon partially because that's Rabbi Yochanan's chiddush. This is a Tanaitic source. We didn't see any Tana that says anything of the sort. So we don't understand how to read this, to which the Gemara says very simply, they must be new kohanim who just came into the temple that morning, or that early morning, right? It was still nighttime, and that's why they need to wash their hands. Had they been there the night before, they wouldn't have needed to, and that could fit with Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so I'm going to just review this part of the daf for now. This will be our review for today of this section before we move on. we started with the psul of lina, right? So we started with kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, and does the nighttime break that? We saw machloket Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and Rebbi. Then Rav Dimi basically came and said, well, just like lina doesn't ruin kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, well, we say the same for the water in the kior. It does not get disqualified according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon. And for that, we had a back and forth trying to figure out, right? In the end, we sided with that it's definitely possible to say what Rabbi Ami quoted Rabbi Yochanan is saying, as quoting Ilfa as saying, that it's the same exact machloket. If the water does not, you don't need to do it again, then the water is not disqualified overnight. And we have that whole question. What about the Mishna about the muchni? To which in the end we said that Mishna actually could follow Rebbe. Then we had this halacha of Rabbi Yochanan who said, you don't need to do it again. And then we tried to figure out who does he hold like. We have Rabbi and Rabbi each. One said it's like Rebbe and modified Rebbe, and one said it's like Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and just says Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon only partially. And then we questioned the second opinion of Rava, but resolved it. Okay, now we're going to have two more questions today, and they're a little bit parallel. Ibayla. Continuing with this topic of kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, does going out of the temple ruin your kiddush yadayim v'raglayim? So if you leave the temple and you want to come back in, do you have to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim again? Intim telomar lina lo pasla to lo parish. Now you might want to say, look, lina doesn't disqualify. Let's say you take Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's position. He says lina doesn't disqualify. That's because there's no break. You're still in the temple doing the work. But Yitzia de Parish asuche masich date. In other words, what cancels kiddush yadayim v'raglayim? What we call hesech hadat. You stop thinking about it. Okay, you wash your hands, and then if you get your mind off of it and you don't think, oh, I'm still doing the avoda and all that because you left the temple, then it cancels it. So since you left the temple, maybe you could say you probably forgot about the fact that your hands were sanctified and you have to keep them in a particular way, and that will ruin it. Oh, Dilma, or perhaps, but since at any point you want, you could just come back into the temple. Maybe you are still minded toward it, and that wouldn't break the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Okay, again, the other thing, by the way, is something that was in a sanctified vessel that leaves the temple is disqualified. So the question is, your hands that were sanctified when you leave the temple, are they right? Is that break it or not? So first source we're going to have 4 sources to try to prove this. First one, Tashma. So you sanctified your hands and feet, and then they became impure. Matbilan, okay, just your hands. So you put your hands, you tovel them. Okay, this is like to clean your hands off. And you don't need to do lekadesh. But yatsu, if they left the temple, like let's say you put your hands outside the temple, like outside the Azara, you just put your hands outside. They stay in their sanctified state. So what do you see here? Yatsa is not a problem. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. That's talking about yatsu yadav. Your body's in the Azara. You just put your hands out. But yadav, yatsu yadav, lo kamibaylan. I wasn't asking about that. Ki kamibaylan yatsa kogfo. I was talking about if your whole body went out. That's a different story. Okay, your hands, there's no hesech hadat if your hands just happen to go out. So that doesn't prove anything. Tashma. Okay, second attempt. If you didn't wash your hands and feet, you have to wash your hands and feet, basically. So you take a klei sharei from inside and you use it for kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. What if kidesh b'klei sharei b'chutz? What if you did it with a vessel outside the temple, but it was a sanctified vessel? O b'kli chol b'fnim, or the reverse. You took a non-sanctified vessel and washed your hands and feet with it inside the azara. Oh, shetabal b'mei ma'ara, you just went in a mikveh, like a mikveh of, water from a cave. Ve'avad avodato psula. If you did that, and you did work in the temple after that, your work is disqualified. Now, what do they want to derive from this? Tama de kidesh b'klei sharei b'chutz. It says specifically if you used a klei sharei outside the temple. Ha kidesh b'fnim v'yatsa. But it sounds like if you did the whole kiddush outside. But what if you were inside, did the kiddush inside, and just went outside? It sounds like, it's a bit of a weird inference, in the Gemara will say we don't necessarily need to infer that, but right now they're going to try to infer that. Ha kidesh b'fnim v'yatsa v'datok shera. Only if your whole sanctification was outside. If you did sanctification inside and just happened to walk outside, sounds like it's fine. To which they say, no. Dilma kidesh b'klei sharet b'chutz hechidami. What does it mean? Maybe kidesh b'klei sharet b'chutz. Kigon da'afik yadav leval v'kidesh. Maybe it means that you just put your hands outside and sanctified it. Not that you actually walked outside. In other words, if you walked outside, then and then done it, right? Then we could say maybe, okay, but if you did it inside and walked outside, it would be fine. But this doesn't even involve walking outside. Maybe it's just you put your hands right outside the Azara and did the washing of it there. And therefore, but still, our question is not just your hands. Maybe that case is just your hands went out and not your whole body, and we need a case where it's your whole body. So Amalei Rav Zvid Rav Papa, third attempt. Tashma, let's learn from here. Let's say you went out of the walls of the Azara. Im lishhot, if you go for a long time, ta'un tefillah, you have to go in the mikveh. Okay, this is clearly your whole body goes out. Im lefisha, if it's temporary, like for a short time, ta'un kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, then you just have to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. That's what we're looking for. You walked out. You have to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. It doesn't matter how long you went out for. But afterwards, he said the story. Papa says, Ma, Amarle, hacha b'mayaskina, kilon sheyatza, lasech raglav, ulati mav. No, this is talking about when you went to either defecate or urinate, okay? The first one is, okay, you need if you go to defecate, you have to do tefillah. If you go to urinate, you have to do kiddush yadayim for a. And maybe that's what it means. And then it has nothing to do with our topic. That's it, because you went out and did something, but not just going out by itself. To which the Gemara says, how could you say that source is talking about that? Because the continuation of that Braita is, if you defecate, you have to do tefillah, you have to go to a mikveh. If you do urinate, then you have to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. By the way, I want to point out, before tefillah was needed, you didn't even need kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Tefillah was an easier, like a lighter thing to do, and that was not that. There your hands became impure, and you just put your hands, like you tovel your hands, and that was, you needed to do that even though you didn't even need kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Here, right? That was, I'm sorry, let me just get the direction. There it was shelo yichotz yadayim v'raglayim. Sorry, I want to just find the source. Kadesh yadav v'raglav v'nitmeu matbilam ve'ein tzarich lekadesh. Right? You just have to dunk your hands. You don't even need kiddush. Here, the tefillah is your whole body. That's a different story. That's much more like a more serious thing. Okay, so for something it's a higher level to the tefillah, and then you do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Anyway, the point being here that it already says that. So you can't say the previous line means that when the later line means that. To which the Gemara says, what do you mean? Of course you can. Tane v'hadam mefarish. First it said it in kind of unclear language, and then it specified this is what we mean by that. So this has nothing to do with our topic because it was specifically going out to urinate or defecate, nothing to do with, right? And then the urinating would require kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, but not if you didn't. If you just walked out stam for no reason, right? Or for whatever reason, we don't necessarily assume. Okay, last source for this one, and then we'll end with one more question and a possible answer. Tashma, para. Rabbi Chia bar Yosef Amar. So with the para aduma, what does it say here? Mikadesh, the kohen who's going to go work with the para aduma. The para aduma ceremony was done in Har HaZeitim, outside the Azara. Now, it says here, Mikadesh b'klei sharet b'fnim. First you do kiddush of the klei sharet inside. You do your hands and feet. V'yotze, and then you go out. Now, the whole idea is you're supposed to be pure when you're doing the process. What's the problem? Well, the problem is you just left. If it cancels your kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, then you don't have it anymore because you just left. So Rabbi Yochanan amal afilu b'chutz v'afilu b'kleicho v'afilu b'kedash al-cheres. So Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Okay, so the first is Rabbi Chia bar Yosef says you need to do this mekadesh b'klei sharet b'fnim. Rabbi Yochanan says even outside you can do the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Even in a klei chol, you don't even need a sanctified vessel, and even mekadesh al-cheres, even in a cup of an earthenware cup. Okay. Anyway, Rabbi Yochanan doesn't interest us much. It's the first opinion. So Amar Papa ho'il. So what do you see? Going out doesn't ruin it. Amar Papa shani para ho'il v'chomaseh b'chutz lo pasla b'yitzia. Oh, here we're going to be lenient with the paraduma because the paraduma, everything is done outside. So it obviously doesn't come in the same criteria as everything else. And that's why the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim doesn't get disqualified, but for everything else it possibly would. Ihachi lamali demakadesh. So wait a minute. Then why do you even need to sanctify the hands and feet of the kohen if he's not even doing something that's high level sanctity? To which they say ke'en avodat pnim, because they model the paraduma after the usual avodot that go on inside, but it's not really of the same level, and therefore you don't really learn. So we have 4 attempts to answer this question. Again, our question was Yitziah Mausha Tu'il B'Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. Does going out ruin Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim and break it that you have to do it again? Do we call that Hesed Chadat, or do we say, well, maybe you you can come back in at any time, so maybe you don't have Hesed Chadat, like a lapse of awareness kind of thing, you kind of forget about it? Well, no answer. Next question. Ibail. And this will continue into tomorrow's daf. Tum'ah, ma'u shetu'il l'kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Does tum'ah ruin tum'ah yadayim v'raglayim? Same kind of idea here, but this time you became impure. Does that ruin it? So, imtim talomer yitzia lo pasla, if you want to say in the previous one, maybe going out doesn't disqualify, but, right, degaver chazi, because the person still could come back in at any time. Aval hacha degaver lo chazi, but now you're impure. Asuche masich date. So you're clearly going to say, oh, I'm not thinking about this anymore because I can't even go into the temple now. O dilma kevanta hadar chaze, dakle v'lo masich date. Or do we say, wait, but you can just go in the mikveh and come back in already like that night after the sunset. So maybe it's not such a big deal. Okay, maybe you don't have hesed chadai because you know you can come back soon. So that's the question. Tashma. So now they say, let's learn from here. Right, forget about the fact you might have to urinate during the day, which anyway is going to need kiddush adav raglayim, but maybe we'll address that. Tashma. Kiddush adav raglav v'nitbu matbilan. This is the same source we quoted before. It was the first source of the previous sugya. We're going to quote two of these. Okay, you're going to see we're going to go back to the para one, but that we'll deal with tomorrow. So if you did kiddush adav raglayim and then became impure, so matbilan, you go in the mikvah, right? You put your hands in the mikvah. Ve'ein tzarich lekadesh. So what do you see here? You don't need to do kiddush. So they say, wait, nitzma'u yadav lo mebayalan ki mebayalan nitma kol gufo. They said, we're not talking about just your hands. We're talking about your whole body. Just your hands getting impure. That's a different kind of tumah. This is your whole body. That's a different story. That's not what the source was talking about. Right? So they say, kol gufo, tepukle kevan debayal leme'abad heref shemesh asuche. So now they're going to say, here's the question, right? Tepukle, we should learn it from here. Kevan debayal leme'abad heref shemesh asuche masach date. So they say, wait a minute. It's obvious, since you have to wait till the nighttime, as I said before, for sure you're going to say, oh, right, I'm not thinking about this anymore. And, right, like I said, you're going to end up having to go to the bathroom, right? You're obviously going to need kiddush adav raglayim. So they say, no, here's the case. The question is, what if you became impure right at the time of shkiat chamat, where it was almost nighttime, and then you could go to the mikvah, and then you wait till sunset, and then it's really a short time, and then let's say you didn't urinate, so then theoretically that's the question. So second attempt to answer this question, Tashma para. Rabbi Rabbi Yosef Amar, Mekadesh b'klei sharei b'fnim v'yotzei. Rabbi Yochanan Amar afilu b'chutz, afilu b'klei chol, afilu b'kedash acheres. We have this machloket again. Whether you do the kiddush of your yadayim v'raglayim in a klei sharei inside and then go out, or whether you just do it in a vessel, any kind of vessel you want, anywhere, anything. We're going to get back to this because we haven't at all seen the connection and why we're going to learn from here, but we're going to talk about that in tomorrow's talk. So again, we reviewed the first part already about whether lina is posel for, right? Does lina ruin the water? And is the muchni really only according to Rebbe or also according to Rabbi Elazar and Shimon and the whole discussion? Then we have these two questions. Going out of the temple, does that break your kiddush adav raglayim? And tumah, does that break your kiddush adav raglayim? With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.